Nothing in this podcast or on our website should be construed as medical advice. Consult your healthcare provider for your individual nutritional and medical needs. The information presented is based on our research and is strictly that of the author and not necessarily those of any professional group or other individual.
Hi, I'm Sue Becker from Bread Beckers. Welcome to Sue's Healthy Minutes. I'm so excited you've joined me today, and I hope this episode encourages you and allows you to find the answers you have been praying for the health of you and your family. I often hear people remark that they cannot eat bread or at least have to limit their consumption because they have diabetes or issues related to elevated blood sugar. Of course, you might think, everyone knows that diabetics have to avoid carbohydrates, right? But do they really? 20 years ago or more, we wouldn't have thought twice about this advice. And many of us still do not even question this advice being given that diabetics should avoid carbohydrates and get their nourishment from high protein, high fat foods such as meat and dairy, along with a few green vegetables. But there is, in fact, growing concern among scientists and even doctors that specialize in diabetes that this advice about carbohydrates may actually be wrong. There is still so much to learn about diabetes, but the big error concerning carbohydrates was made years ago and was based on the assumption that our bodies treat all carbohydrates the same, whether they are from highly refined white sugar and white bread or whole grains. But as it turns out, that is not the case at all. All carbohydrates are not created equal. Today, I want to share with you how fiber, found particularly in real whole grains, can greatly influence the management of blood sugar levels and help us maintain the perfect balance between high and low levels of glucose in our blood. Please understand that, as always, the information I'm sharing is in no way to be taken as medical advice, nor an oversimplification of an often complex issue. But nevertheless, the physiological manner in which our bodies work cannot be overlooked. In 1994, the CDC declared that diabetes had reached epidemic proportions and is now considered the 7th leading cause of death. Roughly 11% of the American population has diabetes, with the rate among adults over 65 reaching as high as 26%, and another 38% of adults are considered predisposed. Diabetes is defined as a condition in which the blood sugar levels remain too high over a long period of time. In type 1 diabetes, previously known as juvenile diabetes, the pancreas, for whatever reason, stops producing insulin. In type 2 diabetes, previously called adult onset, but is now prevalent among children and teens, the body still produces insulin, but is insufficient in controlling blood sugar levels. Scientists do not fully understand what causes diabetes, but we have a pretty good understanding of what goes on in the body of people who have it. A healthy body maintains a constant level of sugar in the form of glucose in the blood. It accomplishes this through a number of mechanisms that raise and lower the blood sugar level as needed. The most important factor in lowering blood sugar is the hormone insulin that is produced by the B cells in the pancreas. After a meal or food is eaten, blood sugar levels naturally rise, which stimulates the release of insulin by the pancreas into the bloodstream, where it allows for the uptake of glucose by the cells, where it is used for energy. This uptake by the cells, in turn, lowers our blood glucose levels. Blood sugar levels will steadily drop over several hours after a meal. If the levels drop too low, another pancreatic hormone known as glucagon is released by the pancreas, which helps bring blood glucose levels back up to normal. When not enough insulin can be produced by the pancreas to meet the blood sugar demand, or when for some reason there is resistance by the cells to the insulin produced, high blood sugar levels or diabetes is the result. On the other hand, if the overproduction of insulin is stimulated by excessively high blood sugar levels, the blood glucose levels may drop too rapidly, thus lowering blood sugar levels too quickly. Once again, the pancreas is called on, but if the pancreas cannot adequately meet the demand for glucagon, the result will be low blood sugar or hypoglycemia. So, how can a diet rich in fiber from complex carbohydrates such as whole grains actually help prevent or possibly even reverse these blood sugar related health issues? You might remember in episode 3 of Sue's Healthy Minutes, Eat More Fiber, or even in episode 17, our discussion of fiber and digestion, that complex carbohydrates such as whole grains and fresh fruits and vegetables that are high in fiber are broken down more slowly during digestion. All carbohydrates are eventually broken down into glucose that enters the bloodstream and is necessary for supplying our muscle cells with energy. But the slower digestion of the fiber in complex carbohydrates slows this release of sugar into our bloodstreams. This slow release of glucose gives us not only a steady source of energy over several hours after a meal, but also prevents that rapid and high spikes in our blood sugar levels, therefore greatly reducing the demand for insulin production and the release of insulin by our pancreas. This helps to keep our blood sugar levels fairly constant without an abnormal dip in our blood sugar levels as well. Therefore, a diet rich in fiber from complex carbohydrates helps maintain stable blood sugar levels, which in turn helps the pancreas meet the insulin and glucagon demand. Unfortunately, the standard American diet of heavily processed carbohydrates that have been stripped of not only valuable nutrients, but most of the fiber as well, can be attributed to the rise in the incidence of diabetes. In fact, researchers often, once again, attribute this rise to the introduction of the popular refined flour and white bread that came on the scene in the late 1800s. Historically, statistics indicate an enormous jump in the number of diabetes deaths from 1875 to 1895, and health experts actually make the connection that this is the same period of time that the United States switched from the fiber-rich, locally milled stone ground wheat flour to the more refined steel roller mill flour, stripped of the fiber and nutrient-rich bran and germ. This is certainly worth looking into more closely. What is it about the refined white bread that could cause this rise in diabetes? The bread and flour products offered to us today are not at all what bread and flour were prior to the 1900s. The invention of the steel rolling mills changed our flour and our bread forever, and in turn, our health. During this milling process of flour, all of the bran and germ are sifted away, leaving us with a flour that is for all practical purposes devoid of nutrients and almost completely devoid of fiber. The bread, cakes, cookies, and crackers made with this flour is not only devoid of fiber and nutrients, but almost always loaded with added sugars. These products offered abundantly to us in the store are nothing more than simple carbohydrates. And don't for a minute be fooled by those labeled whole grain or multigrain. Read the label and you will notice the abundance of added sugars and that the amount of fiber is almost negligible. When we consume these refined flour products, they are easily and rapidly broken down during digestion into simple sugars and glucose. With no fiber present to slow that release of sugar into the bloodstream, shortly after eating, we will see a very rapid rise in blood sugar levels and a huge demand for an insulin. At first, our pancreas is strong and can keep up with the demand, but an overproduction of insulin in response to the high blood sugar levels can often cause the blood sugar to drop quite quickly, leaving us feeling a little shaky and actually wanting more sugar. The pancreas, though, is called on again to produce the hormone glucagon to bring those blood sugar levels back up. We are indeed fearfully and wonderfully made. Unfortunately, we have often, at this point, already tried to correct the problem to satisfy our cravings and our need for sugar with another white flour sugar-filled snack or some sort of soft drink or candy. This again shoots our blood sugar levels up, and the process of insulin demand begins all over again. This continuous lifestyle, over time, often adds unused calories to our diet, resulting in weight gain, constant cravings, and actually low energy. The pancreas, at some point, simply cannot keep up with the demand. Whether you struggle with high blood sugar levels, as in diabetes, or low blood sugar levels, such as chronic hypoglycemia, the root cause seems to be the same. But the good news is that it has been proven that dietary and lifestyle changes can often reverse these diseases or at least significantly lower the risk as well as the complications from these issues and the need for medication. Dr. James Anderson of the University of Kentucky, more than 30 years ago, proved just that. Under careful medical supervision, he took insulin-dependent diabetics off of the standard high-protein, low-carbohydrate diet and put them instead on a high-carbohydrate but high-fiber diet. This high-fiber diet consisted mostly of whole grains and some fresh fruits and vegetables. He noted that there was a rapid drop in insulin requirements among his patients, and many were able to completely discontinue their use of insulin. And despite the lower insulin use, blood sugar levels were remarkably low. Dr. Anderson continued his treatment of diabetes with high fiber complex carbohydrates, and in one study, 16 of 18 patients were able to quit taking insulin completely. It is important to note here that all of these patients had type 2 diabetes, or what used to be called adult onset. But Dr. Anderson continued his treatment protocol even with some patients that had type 1 or juvenile diabetes. Type 1 diabetics have a genuine lack of insulin and more severe symptoms in general. While none of these patients were able to discontinue their need for insulin, all were able to greatly reduce the amount of insulin needed. Dr. Anderson's positive results reducing blood sugar levels and insulin needs by implementing a high fiber, high carbohydrate diet were duplicated by other doctors all around the world. Doctors in Israel noticed a significant improvement in some patients in just 3 days. In England, a group of doctors and nutritionists who use this diet, high in carbohydrates and fiber, largely in the form of whole grain bread, saw such good results among their patients that they concluded that it is no longer justifiable to prescribe a low carbohydrate diet to type 2 diabetics. It is now undeniable that whole grains and other whole real foods offer not only fiber, but nutrients such as chromium and magnesium that are important cofactors for insulin and therefore critically important to enable the body to uptake the needed glucose into our cells. You may recall from episode 6, Wartime Bread, how during World War II and shortly thereafter, food shortages were a critical problem in England. These shortages led the government of Great Britain to forbid the sifting of the bran and germ away during the milling process of wheat flour, switching instead to a flour that retained more of the wheat grain and consequently more fiber. You might remember that during that period, the death rate from diabetes fell an astonishing 55% in men and 54% in women. And at the end of that period, the diabetes death rate for women was at its lowest level in the entire 20th century. Perhaps it's time to go back to wartime bread. Real bread made from freshly milled whole grain flour, God's perfect provision, full of fiber and nutrients to help our bodies utilize its perfect source of energy and in return, maintain proper blood sugar levels. Again, I want to stress that this information is presented not as medical advice or to suggest in any way that you quit taking your medications, but to hopefully encourage you and help you understand that real bread, whole grains, and real food high in fiber may be the best thing the doctor could prescribe for you. Thank you for listening today. I hope you were encouraged. Until next time, this is Sue Becker from Bread Beckers with Sue's Healthy Minutes.
Sue's Healthy Minutes podcast has been a presentation by the Bread Beckers Incorporated located in Woodstock, Georgia. For more information, store hours, and learning opportunities, visit breadbeckers.com and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast and never miss an episode. Share this with 2 friends who would benefit from this information, and be sure to join us again next week for more of Sue's Healthy Minutes.